The soft hum of the cryogenic chamber filled the sterile laboratory. As Nira Ashworth made her final preparations, her fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted the biomonitoring sensors, attached to her temples not from fear, but from excitement. After 3 years of development, the Eternal Rest Project was finally ready for human testing, and she had volunteered to be the first. "Are you certain about this, Nira?" Her research partner's voice carried a note of concern that seemed almost genuine. Serafini Blackthorn stood at the control console, her emerald eyes reflecting the blue glow of the chamber's interior lights. Despite their professional collaboration, there had always been an undercurrent of tension between them, a competition that went beyond mere scientific rivalry. Nira smiled, brushing a strand of auburn hair from her forehead. "Someone has to take the leap, Sira. The colony ships need this technology. 50 years of travel to Kepler-4 for to be is to long for conventional life support. With cryosleep, we can carry 10 times more colonists in the same space." Serafine's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The Kepler project had been Nira's brainchild from the beginning, and despite Serafine's significant contributions to the cryogenic technology, Nira would forever be remembered as the pioneer who made interstellar colonization possible. "The neural preservation matrix is still experimental," Serafini pressed. "We don't know the long-term effects on memory and cognitive function. Then I'll be the test case." Nira replied, stepping toward the chamber. The glass coffin, as some of the technicians called it, stood open like a crystal sarcophagus. Its interior was lined with thousands of microsensors, designed to monitor every aspect of her physiology during the suspended animation. The simulations show a 97.3% success rate. "Those are odds I can live with." As Nira settled into the chamber, she thought about Marcus, her fiancé, who was probably at that moment preparing for his shift at the lunar mining station. They had planned to marry when she returned from her 50-year sleep. When the colony ship Horizon's Dream reached its destination and began humanity's first settlement beyond the solar system, it would be a new beginning for them both, a chance to build something unprecedented together. Initiating pre-cooling sequence, Serafini announced, her voice now purely professional. The chamber began to fill with a fine mist as the temperature slowly dropped. Nira felt a strange sense of peace wash over her as the cold embraced her like a gentle tide. She had spent countless hours perfecting the chemical cocktail that would preserve her cells, protect her memories, and keep her dreams intact through the long sleep. The last thing she saw before the neural interface activated was Serafine's face through the frosted glass. For just a moment, her colleague's mask of professional composure slipped, revealing something that might have been regret, or perhaps something darker. Then the preservation chemicals reached her brain, and Nira Ashworth began her journey into the future. In her dreams, she was dancing. Marcus held her close as they swayed to music that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. They were in the observation deck of Horizon's Dream, watching Kepler-4 for to be grow larger in the viewports. The planet was beautiful, with swirling blue oceans and green continents that promised new life. Other colonists moved around them, talking excitedly about the homes they would build, the children they would raise under an alien sun. "We did it," Marcus whispered in her ear. "We really did it, Nira. A new world for humanity." She smiled in her sleep, unaware that in the laboratory above her frozen form, Serafini Blackthorn was making subtle adjustments to the preservation protocols. The changes were minor, almost undetectable, but they would alter the duration of Nira's sleep in ways that no one could predict. Serafini told herself she was improving the system, making it more stable, but deep in her heart, she knew the truth. Jealousy was a powerful motivator, and the woman who would wake up in Nira's place would inherit a very different world than the one they had planned together. As the decades passed and Serafine's own research led her down darker paths, the sleeping woman in the hidden chamber became both a reminder of her guilt and a symbol of the power she had claimed for herself. 500 years would pass before Nira Ashworth opened her eyes again, and when she did, she would discover that her greatest rival had not only survived, but had transformed herself into something beyond human imagination. The woman who had once stood beside her in the laboratory had become a goddess, ruling over the remnants of humanity with powers that defied comprehension. But in her dreams, Nira continued to dance with Marcus under alien stars, blissfully unaware that her future held not the peaceful colony she had imagined, but a world where love would be her only weapon against divine tyranny. The first sensation was warmth against her face, followed by the acrid smell of smoke and rust. Nira's eyes fluttered open to find herself staring at a face she didn't recognize, angular features weathered by sun and hardship, dark eyes filled with curiosity and something that might have been wonder. The stranger had shaggy brown hair and wore clothing that looked like it had been assembled from salvaged materials. "Easy there," the man said, his voice gentle but cautious. "You've been asleep for a very long time." Nira tried to sit up, but her muscles felt like water. The chamber around her was cracked and partially buried under debris. Vines had grown through the ceiling, and what had once been a pristine laboratory now looked like ancient ruins. Where am I? What happened to the lab? "My name is Cale Voss," the stranger said, offering her a canteen of water. "I'm what you might call a historian. I spend my time exploring the old ruins, trying to piece together what the world was like before the Great Transformation. Your pod was buried under about 20 feet of rubble, in what used to be the Ashworth Research Complex." Ashworth Complex. Nira's mind reeled. "That was named after my grandfather. This is the Genesis Labs facility. I work here. I'm Nira Ashworth." She tried to stand, swaying as circulation slowly returned to her limbs. "How long was I asleep? It should have been 50 years. Where is Serafini? Where is my team?" Kel's expression grew somber. "According to the records I've found, and the carbon dating on the outer structures, you've been in cryosleep for approximately 500 years. The world you knew, it doesn't exist anymore." The words hit her like a physical blow. 500 years. Everyone she had ever known, ever loved, was gone. Marcus, her parents, her friends, all dust for centuries. She collapsed back into the chamber, overwhelmed by the magnitude of her loss. "I know it's hard to accept," Cale said, softly, "but you need to understand what's happened. About 200 years after you went into cryosleep, everything changed. There was an event the old records call the Great Transformation. Someone or something reshaped human civilization. Now we live under the rule of the Eternal Empress." Empress? Nira struggled to process the information. What happened to the governments? The United Earth Federation? Cale helped her out of the chamber and led her toward what had once been the laboratory's main entrance, where glass walls should have been. There was now open air and a view that took Nira's breath away. The city she remembered was gone, replaced by impossible spires that twisted into the sky like frozen lightning. The buildings seemed to be made of some crystalline material that shifted color in the sunlight, and floating platforms connected the towers at various heights. "The Empress rules from the crystal throne in New Olympus," Cale explained, pointing toward the largest spire in the distance. "She's immortal, they say, has powers that defy the laws of physics. Some worship her as a goddess, others fear her as a tyrant, but no one questions her authority." As they walked through the ruins, Cale showed her artifacts he had collected, fragments of the old world, preserved in his makeshift museum. There were photographs of her research team, including one that made her heart stop. It showed her and Serafini standing beside the original cryo chamber, both smiling for the camera. But someone had carefully cut Serafini's face out of the image. "Why is her face missing?" Nira asked, though something cold was already forming in her stomach. Cale was quiet for a long moment, because depicting the Empress as she was before the transformation is forbidden. "But based on the records I've pieced together, I believe your research partner Serafini Blackthorn is the woman who now rules our world." The revelation was staggering. Serafini, her colleague and rival, had somehow not only survived 5 centuries, but had become an immortal ruler. The jealousy and ambition that Nira had sensed in their final moments together had apparently grown into something monstrous. "She's not just immortal," Cale continued. "She has abilities that seem to bend reality itself. Telekinesis, energy manipulation. Some say she can read minds. The official story is that she ascended to divinity through pure scientific achievement, but the older records suggest she may have used technologies that were borrowed from other sources. That evening, in Kel's hidden shelter built into the ruins of an old subway station, Nira learned more about the world Serafini had created. Humanity was divided into castes: the blessed, who served directly in the Empress's court; the functional, who maintained the infrastructure of the new cities; and the forgotten, who lived in the ruins and wastelands beyond the crystal spires. "There's a resistance," Kale said quietly, glancing around even though they were alone. "People who remember that humanity once governed itself. They call themselves the Memory Keepers. They believe that somewhere in the old records is the key to breaking the Empress's hold on our world." As Nira absorbed this information, she found herself studying Kale more closely. Despite the hardship evident in his weathered appearance, there was an intelligence in his eyes that reminded her of the researchers she had once worked with. More than that, there was a kindness in the way he spoke to her, a gentleness in how he had helped her adjust to this overwhelming new reality. "Why did you wake me?" she asked. "You could have left me sleeping." Kale smiled, and for the first time since her awakening, Nira felt a spark of warmth. "Because I've been searching for answers about the transformation my entire life. You're the first person I've found who knew the Empress before she became what she is now. Maybe together, we can figure out how to remind the world what it means to be human." Looking into his eyes, Nira realized that while she had lost everything from her past, perhaps the future still held possibilities she hadn't imagined. The man who had awakened her was offering not just answers, but hope. And in a world ruled by a goddess who had once been her rival, hope might be the most powerful weapon of all. The summons came at dawn, delivered by a figure that materialized from thin air in the center of Kel's shelter. The messenger was humanoid, but clearly not entirely human anymore. Skin that shimmered like mother of pearl, eyes that held depths of starlight, and when it spoke, its voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Nira Ashworth," it intoned, "the Eternal Empress requests your presence in the Crystal Throne. You will come willingly, or you will come regardless of your will." Kale stepped protectively in front of Nira, but she placed a gentle hand on his arm. "I have to go," she said quietly. "If I'm going to understand what Serafini has become, I need to see her for myself." The journey to New Olympus was unlike anything from Nira's time. The messenger who identified itself only as a herald transported them through what appeared to be folded space. One moment they were in the underground shelter. The next they stood before gates of living crystal that pulsed with inner light. The city beyond was a marvel that defied physics, with impossible architecture that seemed to shift and flow like liquid while remaining solid. Citizens moved through the streets with an eerie uniformity, their faces bearing expressions of perfect contentment. When they saw the herald, they dropped to their knees in worship, but their movements seemed automatic, almost mechanical. These were the blessed. Nira realized humans who had been elevated to serve the Empress, but at what cost to their individuality? The Crystal Throne itself occupied the entire top level of the central spire. As they ascended through layers of the palace, Nira saw artwork depicting the official history of the transformation Serafini ascending to godhood through pure scientific brilliance, bringing order and perfection to a chaotic world. But Nira noticed what was missing from these murals: any mention of the research they had done together, any acknowledgement that Seraphine's power might have had more terrestrial origins. When the throne room doors opened, Nira's breath caught in her throat. The woman who sat upon the crystal throne was recognizably Serafini, but transformed beyond mortal limits. Her hair flowed like liquid silver, her skin held the luminescence of moonlight, and her emerald eyes now blazed with power that made the air itself shimmer. She wore robes that seemed to be woven from starlight, and around her head floated a crown of pure energy. "Nira," Seraphine's voice resonated with harmonics that made the crystal walls sing in response. "My dear, brilliant Nira, do you know how long I've waited for this moment? 500 years. Apparently, Nira replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Though I'm curious why you waited so long to wake me." Serafini rose from her throne with fluid grace, her feet not quite touching the ground as she approached. "Because I needed time to build this." She gestured to the city beyond the crystal walls. Time to perfect humanity, to give them the order and purpose they were too chaotic to find for themselves. And time to become worthy of standing beside you again. Standing beside me? Nira took a step back. Sira, what have you done? What did you do to yourself? The goddess, for that's clearly what Serafini had become, smiled with an expression that was both fond and terrifying. I found what we were always searching for, Nira. True transcendence. Do you remember our debates about the limits of human potential? About whether consciousness could evolve beyond biological constraints? I found the answer. With a gesture, Serafini filled the air with holographic displays showing the transformation process. Nira saw her former colleague subjecting herself to experimental procedures that combined their cryopreservation technology with something else, alien artifacts recovered from a crash site that had been kept secret from the public. The process had taken decades, slowly rebuilding Serafini's biology until she became something between human and God. The visitors, Serafini explained, using the euphemism for the extraterrestrial contact that governments had hidden from the public. Their technology didn't just allow for space travel. It allowed for the evolution of consciousness itself. I spent centuries perfecting the integration, becoming something worthy of the power I now wield. And the rest of humanity, Nira demanded, what about their choice in this perfect world you've created? Serafini's expression darkened. Choice is chaos, Nira. Look what choice gave us: wars, poverty, environmental destruction. I eliminated suffering by eliminating the freedom to choose suffering. Everyone has a place, a purpose, a path to fulfillment. Isn't that what we always dreamed of? A world without want, without conflict, without freedom, Nira countered. Sira, you've turned people into beautiful puppets. I've made them happy, Serafini replied. And for a moment, Nira heard an echo of the woman she had once known. But more than that, I've made them ready for what comes next, humanity's next evolutionary step. And I've been waiting for you to take it with me. The true purpose of Nira's awakening became clear. Serafini hadn't preserved her out of sentiment or guilt. She had kept her in cryosleep as a potential partner in godhood. The transformation process required someone with specific neural patterns, someone who had already interfaced with the alien-enhanced cryotechnology, someone like Nira. Join me, Serafini said, extending a hand that crackled with energy. We can rule together, guide humanity to its true potential. We can explore the cosmos as beings of pure consciousness, unbound by mortality or flesh. Everything we dreamed of in those late nights in the laboratory can be ours. Looking at her former friend and rival, Nira felt a complex mixture of pity, horror, and recognition. Part of her, the scientist, the explorer, was tempted by the offer to transcend human limitations, to see the universe from a god's perspective, to have the power to reshape reality itself. But then she thought of Ko, waiting somewhere in this crystal palace. She thought of the resistance fighters struggling to preserve human choice and dignity. She thought of Marcus, long dead, who had loved her for her humanity, not for any power she might wield. I need time to consider, Nira said carefully. This is not a decision to make lightly. Serafini's smile was radiant and terrible. Of course, you may have the freedom of the palace while you decide. But remember, my dear Nira, in the end, there are only two choices: ascension with me, or an eternity watching from the outside as I perfect the universe without you. As Nira was escorted to luxurious quarters in the palace, she realized that her awakening had set something in motion that would determine not just her own fate, but the future of human consciousness itself. And somewhere in the resistance, she hoped, were people who still believed that imperfect freedom was worth more than perfect slavery. 3 days into her stay in the Crystal Palace, Nira discovered she was not as alone as she had thought. The revelation came when she found a hidden message in her quarters, a small piece of paper tucked behind a mirror, written in an ancient script that took her a moment to recognize as pre-transformation English. The gardens at midnight. Come alone. A friend of Kel's. The palace gardens were a marvel of bioengineering, with plants that glowed softly in the darkness and flowers that seemed to sing in harmonious whispers. Nira made her way through the luminescent maze, following the subtle path markers until she reached a secluded grove where a figure waited in the shadows. The man who stepped into the moonlight was tall and lean, with dark hair and intelligent gray eyes that reminded her of storm clouds. Unlike the eerily perfect citizens of New Olympus, he carried himself with the confident bearing of someone who had never surrendered his will to another. When he smiled, it was with genuine warmth rather than the blissful emptiness she had seen. "In the blessed, you must be Nira," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Theo Blackwood, and I've been looking forward to meeting the woman who knew our Empress before she became this." The name stopped her cold. "Blackwood? Are you related to Seraphine's younger brother?" "Yes." His expression grew pained. "Though the woman on that throne is nothing like the sister I remember. The Serafini I knew died during the transformation, and something else took her place." They walked deeper into the garden as Theo explained how he had survived 5 centuries. Unlike his sister, he had chosen a different path to longevity, a slower, more careful enhancement process that extended his life without sacrificing his humanity. While Serafini had become a goddess, Theo had become the leader of the Memory Keepers, working from within the palace to preserve what remained of human freedom. "Kale is safe," he assured her when she asked. "He's with our people, analyzing the data you provided about the original cryo experiments. We believe the key to reversing the transformation lies in those early records." As they talked, Nira found herself drawn to this man who had spent centuries fighting for an ideal that most people had forgotten. There was a sadness in him, the weight of watching his sister become a monster, but also an unshakable determination that reminded her of the best scientists she had known. More than that, there was something in the way he looked at her that made her heart race in a way she hadn't experienced since Marcus. "Why haven't you tried to stop her before now?" Nira asked as they sat beside a fountain that played liquid music. "Because, until now, we didn't have the one thing we needed," Theo replied. "Someone who understood the original process, who could help us find a way to separate the alien technology from its human host. Serafini has become so integrated with the extraterrestrial enhancements that destroying them might kill her, and we're not sure that wouldn't destroy the entire planetary ecosystem she's created." The moral complexity of their situation became clear. Seraphine's power was so vast that her death might cause the collapse of the very reality she had constructed. Billions of people, even if they lived as beautiful puppets, would die if the transition back to normal physics happened too quickly. "There's something else," Theo said quietly. "Serafini isn't planning to wait much longer for your decision. Tomorrow night, there's a ceremony, the Festival of Ascension. She intends to perform the transformation on you whether you consent or not. Once you're like her, she believes you'll understand why she made the choices she did." The news sent a chill through Nira. She had seen what the transformation process entailed, and knew that the woman who emerged would no longer be entirely herself. But as fear gripped her, she felt Theo's hand close over hers. "We won't let that happen," he said firmly, "but we need your help. The Resistance has been preparing for this moment for decades. We have a plan to temporarily disrupt the alien technology that gives Serafini her power. But we need someone who understands the underlying science to make it work." That night, as they planned their desperate gambit, Nira found herself falling for this man who had dedicated his life to preserving human choice. There was something beautiful about his refusal to accept the easy path. His sister had offered immortality and power in exchange for free will. When he looked at her, she saw not the reverence that others showed the Empress's chosen, but genuine affection for who she was rather than what she might become. "I have to ask," she said as they worked together on the technical aspects of their plan. "After 5 centuries of fighting this war, why does it still matter to you? Wouldn't it be easier to accept the world as it is?" Theo paused in his calculations and looked at her with an expression that made her breath catch. "Because I've seen what love looks like when it's chosen freely versus when it's programmed. My sister's subjects adore her because they have no choice in the matter. But what you and I feel, this is real, this is human, and that's worth dying for." In that moment, surrounded by the glowing flowers of a goddess's garden while planning a rebellion that would likely cost them their lives, Nira realized she had found something she thought was lost forever, not just love, but hope for humanity's future. The next evening, as the Festival of Ascension began and Serafini prepared to transform her into a goddess, Nira would have to choose between the power to reshape reality and the chance to preserve what made life worth living. But now, she wouldn't be making that choice alone. The Festival of Ascension transformed New Olympus into a city of light and music. Citizens gathered in the great plaza before the crystal throne, their faces upturned in anticipation of witnessing their empress bestow godhood upon her chosen companion. Floating platforms carried musicians whose instruments sang with otherworldly harmonies, while displays of energy painted aurora across the sky. Nira stood in the preparation chamber, wearing robes of silver and blue that seemed to shift like liquid mercury. Serafini had provided them personally, along with a crown of crystallized starlight that would help channel the alien energies. During the transformation, through the crystal walls, she could see the massive apparatus that would remake her, a fusion of human technology and extraterrestrial science that pulsed with ominous power. "You look radiant," Serafini said as she entered the chamber. The Empress herself was resplendent in robes of pure light, her presence making the very air shimmer with potential. "Are you ready to join me in eternity? I've made my choice," Nira replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Hidden beneath her ceremonial robes was a small device that Theo had given her, a neural disruptor, keyed to the specific frequencies of the alien technology. If their plan worked, it would temporarily sever Serafini's connection to her enhanced abilities at the crucial moment. As they walked toward the transformation chamber, Nira thought about the resistance members positioned throughout the city. Kale was in the archives, ready to broadcast the true history of the transformation to every screen in New Olympus. Theo was in the palace's power core, prepared to reroute the energy systems if needed. Dozens of memory keepers waited in the shadows, ready to protect the ordinary citizens if the disruption of Serafini's power caused chaos. The ceremony began with a demonstration of divine power. Serafini raised her hands, and the very fabric of space around them bent to her will. She created miniature suns that danced between her fingers, transformed matter into energy and back again, and for a moment let her consciousness expand so that every person in the city could feel her thoughts touching theirs. "Behold," she announced to the assembled crowd, "the power that awaits my chosen companion. Together we shall guide humanity to perfection, explore the cosmos as beings of pure consciousness, and ensure that suffering becomes nothing more than a forgotten concept." The crowd responded with perfect synchronization, their voices raised in worship, but Nira noticed something in their expressions beneath the programmed adoration. There were flickers of something else. Fear, perhaps, or longing for something they couldn't quite remember. As Nira was led to the transformation platform, she caught sight of Theo moving through the crowd. He had disguised himself as one of the palace guards, but his eyes found hers. Across the distance, the look they shared held everything they hadn't had time to say: promises of love, hopes for a future together, and the terrible knowledge that they might not survive the next few minutes. "Place your hand upon the interface," Serafini instructed, her voice carrying both anticipation and something that might have been desperation. "Let the alien consciousness merge with yours. Become something greater than human, something worthy of the infinite." Nira approached the control surface, her heart pounding. The alien technology recognized her neural patterns from her original cryosleep, welcoming her like an old friend. She could feel its power calling to her, offering transcendence beyond anything she had ever imagined. For a moment, the temptation was overwhelming, but then she thought of Kale. Risking everything to preserve human history, she thought of the memory keepers, fighting to maintain choice in a world of enforced perfection. Most of all, she thought of Theo, who had shown her that love freely given was worth more than any power. Instead of accepting the interface, Nira activated the neural disruptor. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Serafini's scream of rage and pain shattered crystal throughout the palace. As her connection to the alien enhancements was severed, the carefully maintained reality of New Olympus began to fluctuate. Buildings shifted between their impossible crystal forms and the ruins they had been built upon. The perfect weather systems collapsed into natural chaos, and the blessed suddenly found themselves experiencing emotions they hadn't felt in centuries. "What have you done?" Serafini demanded, her form flickering between goddess and the brilliant but mortal scientist she had once been. "You've destroyed everything I built." Everything I sacrificed for, I've given them back their choice, Nira replied, backing away from the failing transformation apparatus. The right to be imperfect, to struggle, to grow, to love without compulsion. Theo reached the platform just as Serafini raised her hands to strike Nira down, even weakened. The Empress retained enough power to kill, but as her energy gathered, Theo threw himself between them. The blast that would have disintegrated Nira instead sent him crashing into the crystal walls. Theo, Nira rushed to his side, cradling his head as blood ran from his temple. Around them, the ceremony had erupted into chaos as the citizens of New Olympus experienced free will. For the first time in centuries, Serafini stared at her injured brother, her expression cycling through rage, confusion, and something that might have been the ghost of old affection. He chose you over perfection, she said wonderingly. He chose uncertainty over eternal bliss, because that's what love is, Nira replied, tears streaming down her face as she felt for Theo's pulse. It's choosing someone else's happiness over your own power. It's being willing to be vulnerable, to risk loss, to be beautifully, imperfectly human. For a moment, something of the old Serafini seemed to surface the brilliant woman who had once worked alongside Nira to benefit humanity. I just wanted to end suffering, she whispered. I wanted to make everything perfect. Perfection without choice isn't paradise, Nira said gently. It's just a beautiful prison. The neural disruptor's effects were temporary, and already Nira could see Seraphine's power beginning to return. But something had changed in the Empress's expression. The absolute certainty was gone, replaced by doubt and recognition of what she had become. Go, Serafini said quietly. Take him and go. I need time to think about what kind of world I want to rule, if I want to rule at all. Kale appeared at that moment, helping Nira lift the unconscious Theo. The broadcast worked, he reported. People throughout the city are remembering who they used to be. Some are choosing to stay with the enhanced life, but others want to return to being simply human. As they carried Theo to safety, Nira looked back at Serafini one last time. The Empress sat alone on her crystal throne, surrounded by the ruins of her perfect festival, contemplating the weight of godhood and the price of absolute power. 6 months later, Nira and Theo stood together in the restored Genesis labs, now headquarters of the new Humanity Council. The world had fractured into dozens of communities, some choosing to retain their enhancements, others embracing mortality, all free to decide their own path. It wasn't perfect, but it was human. Serafini had retreated to a distant corner of the galaxy, taking with her only those who freely chose to follow. In her final message, she had written, perhaps true godhood isn't the power to control, but the wisdom to let go. As Theo recovered from his injuries, and they worked together to help humanity find its new equilibrium, Nira realized that she had found something more precious than immortality or infinite power. She had found love that was chosen rather than compelled, hope that was earned rather than programmed, and a future that was uncertain but beautifully, wonderfully free. In the end, it hadn't been divine power or alien technology that saved humanity. It had been the simple, radical act of choosing love over control, freedom over perfection, and hope over fear. And in a universe where godlike beings could reshape reality with a thought, that choice had proven to be the most powerful force of all.